Even though this is not exactly the news, for the last little while I've been thinking about that 30-frame lockout on Xbox Series X that Todd Howard announced for Starfield. So, does that mean the Starfield is gonna be really bad in performance, or does that even mean the whole game is a write-off already? Or maybe there's just something else going on. However, there is one thing I'm certainly sure about. Even though I am a PC Master Race member myself, we all should not accept the 30 frames anymore. So, it's been a while. This is gonna be a bit different, but fret not, it's gonna be interesting. So first things first, IGN broke the story and, well there.
Now, your games have always been these just boundary-pushing, envelope-pushing, huge, open, detailed worlds. They've been 30 frames per second on console traditionally. So I'm gonna just turn it over for you for a second here. Just lay out, just so that nobody is surprised come September 6th.
Sure. We do want to do that. You know, it's 4K on the X, it's 1440 on the S. We do lock it at 30. Because we want that fidelity, we want all that stuff. We don't want to sacrifice any of it. But on the consoles, we do lock it because we prefer the consistency.
Oh, we want 30-frame lockout so that the game feels more consistent. In other words, basically what Mr. Todd Howard basically is saying right there is saying, oh hey, if you were to notice that suddenly in some less complex areas or scenes, the game manages 60 frames and it's actually really good, enjoyable gameplay, you know, because it's 60 frames, it's more responsive. And then suddenly you get jarred back into the 30, which is the majority of the game. You get dragged back into the peasantry and realize that, oh shit, the game is not performing quite as well as it should probably. Yeah, consistency. It's just, basically they're saying, oh yeah, we'd like our performance to be worse, just so you don't notice how really bad it is. That's what literally the consistency argument right there is. So, what Mr. Howard here is basically saying is, oh hey, we want to make this fidelitous environment and open worlds the way we want, and we're gonna sacrifice the performance first and foremost to make it happen. Now, if the gameplay comes through, maybe it's worth it, but to be locked on 30 frames a second is kind of a sign of bad things, and we'll get to that. Now, for reference sake, I took a look what Bethesda has pushed out as the performance specs or recommended specs specifically for PCs on Steam. Now, what they say is basically a decent CPU with, you know, appropriate storage, blah 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 blah, but GPU wise it's a RTX 2080. Specs that they listed out for recommended is for slightly above the sex box, you know, the Series X. I don't know about you, but when I see recommended specs, what I, as a customer, I would expect really recommended to be 60 frames a second, minimum being the lowest settings, 30 FPS at minimum. But if the recommended spec for PC is supposed to be basically like the Xbox, that means it's gonna be recommended specs on 30 FPS? Really? You know what I'm smelling? I'm smelling that this increase, and massive increase in performance specs compared to Fallout 4 or 76 especially, is to compensate, at least legally speaking, for the unoptimized and rushed release, rather than to represent the actual performance if the game was properly created. However, looking from the trailers, well, sure, you could say that the game is definitely more fidelitous, visually speaking, but to say that such a big jump in recommended spec increase is due to just the creation engine being better and they putting in a lot more details is suspect to me at the very least. Now, if we take a look at the Starfield itself, well, apparently the development for it started after the Fallout 4 release, according to Todd Howard, and, well, it was delayed once already, mostly because, at least what I claim, was pandemic, and sure, fine, I can understand it, but there were some indicators that I don't think they've done it fully, or rather haven't finished properly developing it, as we saw in the first gameplay trailer. The down. I'll show the screen of it. So in this picture you can see the first gameplay trailer footage, while in this one you can see the recent Starfield Direct from June, 11th, 2023. And honestly, looking at the differences in the visual fidelity there, I kind of suspect that they haven't finished making the game even a couple of months before the release of it. You see, usually a couple of months before the release of the game, you stop working on new features or adding new stuff in and you focus completely on optimization. But what I'm seeing in this particular comparison is that they are still adding stuff to it. And that just smells of another Fallout 76 where stuff is just not added. Now, let's turn our gaze to Starfield's engine, the creation engine. Back in 2011 and 12, whenever Skyrim was released, essentially, the creation engine upon which it ran wasn't the most fidelitous even at the time. It was, frankly speaking, quite average at best. The same thing goes with Fallout 4. Even back then when it released, facial animations still sucked a lot, and frankly speaking, mostly it was an average looking game, but the gameplay at least sustained the core fanbase, and that's fine. The open world was quite nice. However, moving on then to Fallout 76, for example, right? They updated the engine again, although arguably you could say that they basically ported Fallout 4 onto basically a multiplayer platform and didn't fix a lot of bugs, which were patched out on the fan patches, which was also documented, by the way. Fundamentally, Creation Engine has never been the highest fidelity nor the prettiest, so having such high recommended and minimum specs is suspect again. Of course, let's not ignore the fact that Bethesda has never been the best optimizers or coders in the world. Far from it, they have become a joke almost. And at this point, seeing the minimum specs being this high as well as the 30 FPS limitation for consoles is kinda smelling like they're trying to compensate for the public's view. And just the fact that developers are saying, oh, expect performance increase and blah 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 blah, doesn't change the fact that that's bad practice. So then, the 30 frames a second. Now, of course, Bethesda is very keen, and especially Todd Howard is very keen on saying that, oh, well, hey, this is the biggest open world we've ever made, and this is gonna be the greatest thing out there, and sure, yeah, for you that might be true, but in reality, creating walkable and interactable planets has been done before and done quite well. Elite Dangerous 2014 made the whole galaxy, 2015 made planets drivable, 2016 No Man's Sky comes out with all the playable stuff on it that basically resembles Starfield completely. Don't lie, you know it's true. And all of them showcase that it can be done without breaking the bank, or rather your PC, to do so, despite how much Star Citizen tries to convince you otherwise. Let's go into the 30 frames a second. So I did mention about the consistency being bullshit argument. Well, obviously, when you have 30 frames a second consistently, yeah, the game's frame rate is predictable. Sure, there is that predictability that you get accustomed to, and as human beings, we're quick to adapt to environment. While 30 frames a second is the bare minimum that you can reach, why should we stop with bare minimum? That's kind of the funny thing. Once you experience something better and then go back to the worst thing, you get the jarring feeling, and that's what they're trying to avoid. Doesn't solve the core problem, that playing on the worst frame rate is still bad. And that's kind of the thing. The 30 FPS lockout is specifically done to reduce the complaints they get, rather than improving your experience. The whole consistency argument is basically just to sort of wail the argument and saying, oh, well, we don't want you to notice that the game is just running really poorly, so we're gonna lock it in a consistent frame rate, or the minimum frame rate that, it can run, so that you don't notice that 60 frames should be how a game is played, or that the engine is just struggling because we couldn't do optimization. That's how it sounds to me, and that's really how it is. Now, there was another game that Bethesda published and also had 30 frame limitation for consoles. Do you remember which one that was? Yes, that's right, that was the Redfall, and indeed it was a piece of shit. Oh boy, it was lacking content, it was lacking in AI, it was lacking in, well, a lot of other things, and including performance. Now, You could say that, oh hey, because of the merger with Microsoft, well, Microsoft was pushing Redfall to be released, and that might have been true. Well, we can see sort of similarities with Starfield as well. You see, both are locked at 30 frames a second, but the difference is that originally, Redfall was promised with a 60 frames a second. They literally had to glue a goddamn sticker on top of cases for Xbox copies, saying that, oh, on the launch it's not gonna run at 60, it's gonna be 30. However, going ahead of the news cycle, Bethesda is now coming out and saying, oh, well, it's gonna be running at consistent 30 frames. Yeah, we'll see about that, but parallels are still there. Both are locked at 30, a very, very low bar these days for games. And I suppose you can attribute this sort of push for the 30 frames a second, or, well, recent announcement that, oh crap, we need to release this thing. We set the date already. Probably we're not gonna delay it, so let's just release and just say it's gonna be 30 frames a second. That might have been Microsoft's push as well. You never really know, but again, considering the merger and the fact that Xbox Game Pass also needs, you know, titles, might be that Microsoft is pushing Bethesda to release stuff, but honestly speaking, the sole liability for the performance of the game as well as its development should go on the shoulders of the developer. Well, the publisher, well, technically Microsoft is not even publishing it, but, you know, it's the parent company. It's a big corporate mess, basically, but there might be Microsoft influence, but still Bethesda is to be blamed, just like Arcane is blamed for the performance of Redfall, for, you know, the game's own creators' creation. Bethesda has, in the last little while, especially with the Redfall release, been basically kind of cunty. Yeah, and I'm using that word correctly here, especially because, you see, with Fallout 76, they released a stinker, and you could say that, oh, well, hey, it wasn't the mainline Bethesda, yeah, it was some other third-party thing. Okay, well, Fallout 4 also had technical problems, quite a lot of them, still do. Fallout 4 still sucked. When it comes to 30 frames a second, the point I'm trying to make is essentially it's not enough. We should all ask for more, and we should keep the developers accountable, because if we keep accepting the 30 frame, 20 frame rhetoric or other nonsense that the company spews out, especially in the case of Bethesda, who can't even sell a goddamn canvas bag or promises bullshit like, you know, Todd Howard tends to do, well, then we result in essentially the current state where we accept the goddamn cosmetics as good thing, and horse armor that Bethesda was mocked about is now okay and even expected in some people's minds. We're not gonna discuss, of course, the cosmetics today, but the point is, for just the betterment of everyone's enjoyment and, of course, keeping up the developers up to some kind of standard, we have to ask for more, and 30 frames a second wasn't acceptable anyways. Anytime. Fact of the matter is, hardware has progressed tremendously in the last couple of years, hell, even the last decades. And to say that the ever-increasing performance of our great PCs or consoles can't run the games now with more acceptable frame rates to push that performance and the enjoyment of the game is just going backwards, isn't it? Sure, there are games that actually push the boundary of what is possible, but does Bethesda really think that they are, I don't know, Crytek that actually pushes forward the tech, when all they are known for is the buggiest games on the block? Yeah, I don't think so. So when it comes to 30 frames a second, we shouldn't accept it. We should ask for more, so that not only we get a better game, but also better performance. Thus, we get more enjoyment out of it, at least on the performance and technical wise, if not the creative side. And that also upholds the developers to at least some kind of standards, making everyone just benefit from it. But when a company says that, oh, instead of going 120 frames minimum, we're going back to 30, it's kind of short of admittance of basically unoptimized garbage. Well, in the end, what I'm saying is that 30 frames a second is not acceptable anymore. It hasn't been for a decade easily, and that is on consoles especially. Fact is, consoles have been able to produce more than 30 frames a second for a really long time, and everyone benefits from a better frame rate, more smoother gameplay overall, and better experience thus far. So it doesn't matter if you're a PC Master Race member or you're a console peasant, really, we all just like games, and we also should keep the developers up on their toes. While at the same time, 30 frames a second admittance on Starfield really is just saying, oh hey, we just want to release this thing, and fuck the performance, you're gonna all swallow it regardless. That's kind of a cunt move, isn't it? So what I'm saying is, make a delay. A good game is worth waiting for. The only saving grace at this point, it seems, is gonna be the content, and, well, frankly speaking, considering the past examples of Bethesda's work, with acceptance of, I guess, Fallout New Vegas, which they didn't make, and Skyrim, which, frankly speaking, was just a great open world, but not much else. Well, Starfield, just take a delay, make a good game, or at least if you can't make a good, interesting open world, just make technically good for the first fucking time, so that we don't have to laugh at your bullshit and the bugs. It's sad. It genuinely is really sad when we have to think of Bethesda, not as a game makers that make open worlds really cool and stuff, but as game maker that makes interesting games, but always buggy crap. Is that really a reputation to strive for? So, 30 frames a second, not acceptable by anyone. Shouldn't be.